Pastor Ed here again with Daily Devotions now for Saturday, December the 23rd, 2023. Tomorrow, of course, is Christmas Eve. And in the Christmas spirit, we're looking at the prologue of John's Gospel, the Word made flesh who dwelt among us, namely Jesus, and the reason for that, the why of that. And continuing that thought, the late Thomas Lane Butts, the former pastor of First United Methodist Church down in Monroeville, Alabama, once wrote, "This was not an ordinary infant. This child was more than he appeared to be. In adulthood, it became increasingly obvious that he was more than just a man. He looked like us. He grew up like any other child of his time, but he had a reason for being here that not only required him to be human, but more. In him, we got a permanent glimpse of God, and in him we came to know more about God than has ever been known, before or since." Dr. Butts then continues, John does not offer details of how and where. There's no manger scene, no adoring shepherds, no wise men from the east, just the incredibly revolutionary announcement that God has become like us in Christ so that we can then become like him. In this transaction, we come to an understanding of the nature of God that exceeds any previous understanding. In Jesus, we were able to see all of God we needed to see. It's very important for us to keep our eyes upon Jesus when we want to know what God is like. No longer is God a disembodied voice from some far-off, distant place. The incarnation gives us the wonderful insight that not only is Jesus like God, but God is like Jesus and always has been. And so it seems to me that there's at least four very closely related reasons why God chose to do what he did. That is why the Word became flesh and lived among us, why Jesus came to be one of us. And they are, number one, to cross the chasm or deep separation between us and God. Number two, to communicate God's presence to us. Number three, to comfort us. And finally, number four, to give himself to us. First, it was to bridge that insurmountable gap between us and God. John Claypool once wrote about walking around his father's family farm down in Kentucky when he happened to look down and see this giant anthill. There must have been thousands of these little creatures scurrying back and forth, he writes. It was a world unto itself. And as he stood there and studied this anthill, he began to realize that these ants had absolutely no capacity to understand something as big and as complex as he was, no capacity to understand a human being. And then it dawned on him, if only he could somehow become an ant and take with him as much of the reality of a human being as would be possible. In other words, he says, if I could cross this chasm of otherness from my side, then it would be possible for ants to understand the human in ways that they could never have known before. And so then he also slowly began to realize that this mysterious process of crossing the chasm from one side to another has actually taken place. And it happened that first Christmas because, as he writes, God, for us humans and for our salvation, chose to come across that chasm and put God's self in an image that we could understand. God took on visibility. God took on human flesh. God translated God's self into the categories that are accessible to our human ways of knowing. And this means, he adds, that now we have a chance to glimpse deeper into the mystery of God, not because of our powers, but because of the gift of revelation that comes at Christmas. A second, again, closely related reason for the incarnation, which simply means in the flesh, by the way, was that God wanted to communicate his presence to us. A child was once injured in an accident and temporarily left with only the sense of smell. And knowing that her child had to be absolutely terrified by this horrible ordeal, the mother frantically looked for a way that she could still let her child know that she was there right at the child's bedside. And so finally it came to her. Each and every day, the mother specifically chose to wear the same perfume, one that her daughter would immediately recognize as her mom's favorite. And then in this way, while the child could not yet see her mother or touch and feel her mother, she could nevertheless still know that her mother was right there beside her, all because of the scent of her mother's perfume. Now, the perfume itself was not the mother, of course, not her essential nature. But she had chosen that particular perfume because it was something that the daughter could understand and relate to. In much the same way, then, God came to us as a human being, not because this is God's essential nature either, but rather because it was a way in which God could communicate his presence to us on a level that we could comprehend. Third reason why God chose to come to us through the incarnation of Jesus Christ is that he wanted to comfort us. For safety's sake, many of the children who lived in London, England during the nightly bombings of that city by the German Air Force during World War II were sent by their parents to stay with relatives or friends out in the country. But some children remained in the city with their families, or at least their mothers, since many of their fathers were away serving in the armed forces. In some cases, these kids had to live with their mothers in bombed-out ruins, often on poor rations and without sanitary facilities. And yet studies of both sets of children later found that despite the nightly bombings, the children who stayed with their mothers emerged with fewer emotional disturbances than those who were sent away to safer quarters, but were separated from their mothers. Now, those children who were sent away were certainly loved by their mothers too, but the tangible presence of the mothers who kept their children with them in London apparently made all the difference. Well, in much the same way, it is the tangible presence of God in Jesus Christ that has made all the difference to us as well. And finally, God came to us in human form in order to simply give himself to us. Long ago, there ruled in Persia a wise and good king, and he wanted to know for sure how his people lived. He wanted to know about their difficulties and hardships, and so often he would dress in the clothes of a working man or a beggar and then go visit the homes of the poor. But no one whom he visited ever realized that he was really their ruler. Well, one time he visited a very poor man who lived in a cellar. He ate the same coarse food that the old man ate. He slept on the floor on a bed of straw, just like the poor man did. But he spoke kind and encouraging words to the man the entire time he was there, and then he left. Well, later he visited the poor man again, but this time disclosed his true identity. "I am your king," he said. And the king thought that the man would surely now ask for some kind of gift or favor. But he didn't. Instead, the man said, "You left your palace and your glory to visit me in this dark, dreary place. You ate the coarse food that I ate, slept on a bed of straw just like I did. You shared your life with me, and in doing so, you brought gladness to my heart. So let others ask for rich gifts. To me, you've given the greatest gift of all, yourself." After church on Christmas Eve, our family tradition has always been to sit down and watch the classic movie White Christmas, starring Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye. In the film, if you've seen it, the characters played by Crosby and Kaye are devoted to their former Army commander, a General Waverly. It seems that their devotion to him was the direct consequence of his devotion to them, that is, to the men who served under him. Speaking of their general's devotion, Crosby's character at one point puts it this way: "We ate, and then he ate. We slept, and then he slept. The Word became flesh," wrote John, "lived among us. He devoted himself to us by taking on our nature, sharing our existence, feeling our pain, ultimately from the cross. And because he gave himself to us in this way, we now offer ourselves to him, because God in Christ gave us the greatest gift he could have given, himself." There's a final reason why the Word became flesh and lived among us. In the play Green Pastures, that ran for many years on Broadway, playwright Mark Connolly depicts a moving and memorable scene. God is looking out over the parapets of heaven, trying to decide what to do with the sinful situation down on earth. The angel Gabriel enters with his horn tucked under his arm. And sensing the Lord's dilemma, he asks, "Lord, has the time come for me to blow the trumpet?" In other words, to signal the end of time and the time of judgment. No, says God, "don't touch the trumpet, not yet." And God then continues to worry, however, about the problem of human sinfulness. So Gabriel asks God again what he plans to do. Will he send someone to fix the situation? Who will it be? Gabriel makes some suggestions. How about another David or Moses? You could send one of the prophets, Isaiah or Jeremiah. There are a lot of great prophets up here. What do you think, Lord? Without looking back at Gabriel, God says simply, "I'm not going to send anyone. This time, I'm going myself." No one has ever seen God, wrote John. It is God, the only Son, who's close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. This time, God chose to come himself. Well, as I said, tomorrow is Christmas Eve. We have 3 worship opportunities. All will be live streamed. Also, all 3 will be available then on YouTube. 9:30 tomorrow morning, which is going to start out very briefly at the beginning as the 4th Sunday of Advent, but then quickly transition to Christmas Eve. Then a 4 o'clock family service and a 7 o'clock traditional candlelight service. And as always, hope that you can join us for for one of those, or if you're unable to make it here, to watch the live stream, or at the very least, watch the recorded version on our YouTube channel during the week. I'll be back again on Tuesday, the day after Christmas. But until then, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, wish you God's blessings as we relish in this wonderful good news that God came to be with us himself. Till then, take care. Bye.